Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Glasgow Times News Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW. Or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcast and give us any constructive feedback.
From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 11th of March 2022, from the news section, Disability Action ER calls for better bus access after driver pulled away from one-legged veteran. This article is an exclusive by Sarah Pacciaroni. A disability group campaigning for better access to public transport has slammed Glasgow's bus stops after a one-legged veteran was forced to chase a bus in the snow. Savio de Souza, Vice Chair of Disability Action East Renfrewshire, recently witnessed the episode and is now calling for better information at bus stops for people with accessibility issues. Mr de Souza claimed the veteran was waiting at the bus stop on Bass Street, which was out of order. However, this wasn't made clear to the waiting passengers, prompting him to chase after the bus down Renfield Street. He said, "The man, who was clearly a veteran and had only one leg, tried to indicate that he wanted to get on the bus, and the bus driver gestured the bus stops closed. It was also snowing that day, and he went running up the road and towards the next stop. The bus was there, but when he got to the bus stop, the driver, who clearly saw him coming, just drove off." Mr de Souza said there was a sign indicating that the bus stop was closed, but this was placed in front of it on the curbside, meaning it was not visible to passengers waiting. He added, "There is no compassion. We know people with disabilities are going to struggle a bit more with things like this. There's just no thought about how if you change the bus stop and create a temporary bus stop, why create it so far away, forcing someone to run in the snow? It's crazy. You can imagine someone in a wheelchair if you've got at a bus stop down the hill and up the hill. It's not great." Mr de Souza, who has been lobbying Glasgow City Council to improve accessibility, said poor signposting of bus stops and confusing routes, like the multiple 38 buses, are also making life difficult for people with disabilities. These issues would discharge people from using public transport, he said, hindering efforts to make the city carbon neutral. He added, "If we're serious about having green journeys, we need to encourage people to use public transport, not to make it difficult." The council committed to green, accessible travel, but this is an example of how there is no joined-up approach between organisations to improve things. It lacks common sense. For example, on Union Street, if someone in a wheelchair comes out of Central Station, how are they supposed to work out where the bus is? Just a simple sign would be helpful. Glasgow City Council, which owns and maintains the city's 3,000 bus stops, said it's been improving facilities with funding from SPT, prioritising the most used routes. A spokesperson said, "Work includes installing high-access curbs to allow step-free boarding for passengers with mobility issues, introducing new shelters, and adding digital information boards at stops. We liaise routinely with SPT to ensure they're informed of developments that may disrupt bus services, such as roadworks or eventuated road closures. Our overall aim is to ensure barriers to inclusive mobility are removed across Glasgow, and the travel needs of those with disabilities are fully accounted for in project design and policy development." SPT, which provides service information for passengers, said, "Due to the severe bus driver shortages as part of the ongoing impact of the pandemic, many local bus operators are operating revised and limited timetables, often changing at short notice. It is, therefore, recognised that many locations' roadside bus service information at bus stops is regrettably not as accurate as it is required to be for passengers. SPT is currently working to roll out revised roadside information panels across Strathclyde with local bus operators and Transport Scotland to improve the information provision at bus stops. While we have engaged with disability groups as part of our Equalities Impact Assessment, EQIA, to ensure we take the account of the needs of all of those who use public transport, we will now contact Disability Action ER to discuss their specific concerns. A spokesperson for First Bus said, "We are continuing to make positive improvements to the frequency of our services across Glasgow as more drivers join First Bus. We would always recommend customers use the First Bus website or the First Bus app for the most up-to-date timetable information." And that article was an exclusive by Sarah Pacciaroni. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 11th of March 2022, from the news section. ScotRail confirms a person has been hit by train between Muirend and Neilston. By Sarah Campbell, digital journalist. A man has died after being hit by a train between Muirend and Neilston this morning. At around 9:45am, a ScotRail spokesperson said, "Sadly, a person has been hit by a train between Muirend and Neilston. Services on this route are now suspended while the emergency services attend." It was later confirmed the man had been pronounced dead at the scene. A British Transport Police spokesperson said, "Officers were called to Williamwood Station at 9:20 this morning, March 11th, following reports of a casualty on the tracks. Paramedics also attended, and sadly a man was pronounced dead at the scene. The incident has not been treated as suspicious, and a file will be repaired for the Procurator Fiscal. Services have been suspended on the route, while replacement buses are in place via McGill's buses. For further updates, visit ScotRail's Twitter online." And that article is by Sarah Campbell.
This article is from the Glasgow Times, date 11th March 2022, from the Lifestyle section. Greggs warns of sausage roll price hike due to war in Ukraine. By Kieran Doody. Greggs has issued a warning to customers that it could be forced to hike the price of its food items. The high street bakery chain said the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine threatens to increase the cost of raw ingredients, meaning customers could soon have to pay more for its goods. Rising fuel costs is also contributing to the expense of transporting these ingredients, putting further pressure on the retailer to hike its prices. What has Greggs said? In January, it was reported Greggs would increase the price of its sausage rolls by 5p. At the time, the firm's chief executive, Roger Whiteside, said the chain could not rule out further price hikes. A Greggs spokesperson told Bloomberg, "Ingredients and labour costs have been rising, and Greggs is not immune from that." Mr. Whiteside said that the chain would work to mitigate the impact of rising energy costs on customers, but warned everything is going up in price. He said, "Food ingredients are getting more expensive, and energy is getting more expensive than it was looking like then. All the proteins, all the cereals, all the oils, everything's going up in price. As ever, we will work to mitigate the impact of this on customers. However, given this dynamic, we do not currently expect material profit progression in the year ahead." Greggs normally keeps any price hikes limited due to its reputation as an affordable bakery chain. But Mr. Whiteside added, "I'm never going to give a promise that it will always be like that because there's uncertainty in the outlook. So depending on how the market reacts, you might see that we want to protect prices at one end of the market where we can see the competition is more intense, but move prices up more aggressively in other parts of the market." How is the Russia-Ukraine war affecting food prices? Even before the war, supermarket shoppers have been warned to brace for an annual grocery bill rise of about £180 as the cost of living crisis squeezes households. Market research firm Kantar said food prices rose by 4.3% in February, with prices rising fastest for savoury snacks, fresh beef and cat food. But the Russian invasion of Ukraine threatens to increase food bills even further. Canned goods and sunflower oil are due to increase in price, but all supermarket goods could also go up due to the soaring costs of petrol and fertiliser. What else has Greggs announced? At the beginning of the year, Greggs announced plans to open 150 new branches despite losses in response to the supply chain crisis. The food giant said stores had a strong performance in October, with sales in the 12 months of 2021 hitting £1.23 billion. Mr Whiteside said, "While conditions in the first few months of 2022 are likely to remain challenging, we are confident that we are well placed to make progress in the many attractive opportunities that lie ahead." That article was by Kieran Doody. This article is from The National, date 11th March 2022, from the News section. Nicola Sturgeon addresses COVID concerns as cases reach highest level since January, by Gregor Young. Nicola Sturgeon has issued a reminder to Scots as the country recorded the highest COVID case numbers and hospitalisations it has seen since January. The First Minister spoke after some 14,387 COVID cases were recorded on Thursday, while 1,636 people were in hospital with confirmed COVID, up 127 on the day before. That figure was higher than the Omicron peak of 1,571, which was recorded in January this year, with more patients in hospital than at any time since February 8, 2021, when the total was 1,672. In January 2021, hospital numbers peaked at 2,053. Meanwhile, the latest figures showed Scotland recorded another 41 coronavirus-linked deaths, more than double the total of 18 from the previous day. Sturgeon took to Twitter in response to the numbers. "Life is much more normal again, thankfully," she wrote. "But this is a reminder that COVID hasn't gone away. Vaccines are protecting most of us from the worst impacts of this virus, but many still do end up in hospital." She added, "Please continue to take sensible precautions like wearing a mask." It is just 10 days until Scotland is due to lift its mask rules, but the Scottish Government will still strongly recommend that people use face coverings in indoor spaces. Speaking when the announcement was made in February, the First Minister also made clear the Scottish Government would continue to ask those who test positive for COVID to isolate for the recommended period. That article was by Gregor Young. This article is from the Glasgow Times, date 11th March 2022, from the opinion section. Returning to a Glasgow gig, this was a moment, by Adam Miller. You know those gigs where you walk in a casual fan and walk out as a diehard? I went to one of those on March 2nd, 2020. I'd spent the days leading up to the Big Thief's gig familiarising myself with their back catalogue, having had the band recommended to me by a friend with an extra ticket. After a few days of cramming on Spotify, other artist scamming, misinformation spreading streaming services are available, I entered Glasgow's Old Fruit Market looking forward to a solid 7.5 out of 10 show. 7 songs in, it happened. It's not the energy reeling nor the lines in your face. As frontwoman Adrienne Lenker flung herself into the first lines of Not, I realised I was in the presence of something special. I'd rarely witnessed that level of passion and intensity on stage. It was hard to tell whether she was feeding off the audience or lost in her own world and completely unaware of them. By the time she reached her tumultuous guitar solo, I was a convert. I've been to hundreds upon hundreds of gigs, and every now and then you're lucky to be part of a moment. This was a moment. As a society, we were in the last days of that "this feels increasingly concerning and hard to ignore, but will probably be fine" stage. 7 days later, I went to see Steve Martin and Martin Short's comedy show at the Hydro, and the mood had already darkened significantly. The performers joked about bumping elbows instead of shaking hands, while the audience sat elbow to elbow wondering, is this still okay? 3 days later, I walked into the office, informed my editor that this immunocompromised liability would have to start working from home, elbow bumped my colleagues, and uttered the first of approximately 3,000, well, this is all over promises. At that point, I assumed all over would be within a few weeks, and the idea that I would go 2 years without experiencing live music would have been inconceivable. I've spent most of that time indoors, having both the advantage of a job that allowed me to work from my living room and the disadvantage of an immune system that required me to. As normality became a distant memory, my comfort food was old concert clips on YouTube. That and actual comfort food, but that's for another column. I kept coming back to Big Thief's Not. Snippets filmed on phones, talk show performances. The song never lost its potency, but my attempts to relive that feeling from the old fruit market were in vain. In January 2020, Rolling Stone spoke of the profound connection Lenker and Big Thief have fostered with their fan base, adding, Lenker was given a much-needed reminder when she witnessed audiences crying and holding each other while singing aloud to every word of her songs. It's hard to capture that on YouTube. In much the same way as working from home left me looking back with fondness on minor office inconveniences such as canteen small talk and awkward urinal roll-on Friday ha-ha grunts, I would now happily put up with everything that used to bother me about gigs. Spending 2 hours waiting for my favourite song, saying they'll probably play it in the encore, only for the encore to consist of one new song. Glasgow uni accents chatting all the way through the set. Always been stuck behind the tallest man in the venue, regardless of where I stand. I'd have put up with it all and thanked you for it. Gigs have long since returned, but being in the clinically extremely vulnerable group means returning to gigs isn't so straightforward. I'd turned down a few recently, but as tickets for these gigs purchased in 2019, 2020 and 2021 started arriving, I had to weigh up whether it was time to get back into a crowd. After speaking to an immunocompromised friend, I decided to go for it. With a January booster topping up the 3 vaccines I received last year, I figured this was the time to tentatively ease my way back in, which was how I found myself all after 2 years after Big Thief at the Old Fruit Market, following that up with Big Thief at the Barrowland. Given how much has changed during that time, it was comforting to find the greatest venue on earth completely untouched. Still the same iconic name in lights. Still the same warm cans in plastic cups. Still the same poster informing us of an upcoming Echo and the Bunnymen gig that's been upcoming since Britpop. We stood near the back of the room with our masks on, and as the band kicked off with Promise as a Pendulum, I felt part of a communal excitement that I haven't experienced since March 2020. Finally, 15 songs in, came the moment of catharsis that I'd been waiting for. Not was as life-affirming as I'd hoped it would be. Lenker's voice as soulful, her guitar as fervent. It was immediate and all-consuming, not just a clip or a memory. This was a moment. That article was by Adam Miller.
Glasgow Times News on Monday the 14th of March. Nicola Sturgeon to update on COVID restrictions as expert issues warning. An article written by Jack Aitchison, live editor, The Herald. Nicola Sturgeon will update MSPs on Tuesday on the remaining coronavirus restrictions in Scotland. The restrictions, including the requirement to wear face masks, are currently due to end on March the 21st. The Chief Medical Officer has said ministers will make a decision on whether to go ahead with lifting the face mask requirement shortly. Professor Sir Gregor Smith added ministers will be advised to take a cautious approach to lifting the remaining restrictions. Speaking to the BBC's Good Morning Scotland programme, Sir Gregor said he's keeping a close eye on rising infection levels and hospital cases. However, he said there's some early evidence that hospital admission rates are beginning to top out. He said data shows some older people are beginning to adapt their behaviour by reducing their contact slightly, while the use of face masks is also up. Asked what advice he would give to ministers, he said, "I think that a cautious approach at this point in time is probably the right approach, and we're already seeing the public adopting these additional protections." In the first week of March, an estimated 1 in every 18 Scots had COVID-19, data from the Office for National Statistics showed. Sir Gregor said, "We've been keeping a close eye on these for the last 3 weeks, and clearly when you see cases begin to increase like this, it does give you a little bit of concern." Hospital occupancy began to rise around February the 14th, he said. "We're seeing more older population becoming impacted on this occasion, and that's leading to some longer lengths of stay, which is driving occupancy up as well." Sir Gregor said there were some hopeful signs the hospital admission rate has begun to top out just a little bit over the course of the latter end of last week. An article written by Jack Aitchison. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 14th of March. North Lanarkshire Council agrees deal to purchase Campanol Town Centre. An article written by Sarah Paccheroni, multimedia journalist. North Lanarkshire Council has confirmed that it's agreed a deal in principle to purchase the centre, Campanol, as the first step towards its regeneration. The centre, Campanol, built in 1967 as part of the new town development, is ultimately expected to be replaced with a town hub as part of a long-term multi-million-pound programme. Last week we reported on the council revealing plans for the takeover. The purchase will mean that the vast majority of the original town centre buildings will be owned by the council. The redevelopment will not start for a number of years and will take around a decade to complete. Council-owned facilities such as the Tryst, library and other offices in the town centre will also be replaced, with facilities transferring to the new state-of-the-art hub as part of the programme. The new town hub will be built as part of the council's The Place, The Vision programme. As part of this programme, the council published draft town visions for all the towns in North Lanarkshire in 2020, which have since been the subject of consultation with local people. In Campanol, the new town hub will incorporate schools, leisure facilities, office space and a new health centre. Alongside this would be new retail, town centre homes and amenity spaces, all of which will be connected through active and sustainable travel options. Councillor Jim Logue, leader of North Lanarkshire Council, said, "The acquisition of the centre Campanol is an extremely significant part of the town vision for Campanol and would represent a huge step forward in the regeneration of the town." While the building represented the future in the 1960s, it's clear that it does not fit with the residents' vision of what they need from a modern town centre. We're absolutely committed to ensuring that Campanol and all the towns in North Lanarkshire is a vibrant, living town, and our overall investment in town centres, hundreds of millions of pounds, is about ensuring a sustainable future. The centre, Campanol, will remain open for business while plans are further developed, and tenant businesses will be part of an in-depth engagement programme over the coming years to ensure a smooth transition. Councillor Logue added, "While these plans will have a significant positive impact on Campanol, they'll take a number of years to realise. During that time, Campanol remains open for business, and the council will support retailers and other businesses throughout to maximise their potential and continue to attract custom." An article written by Sarah Paccheroni. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 14th of March. Partially sighted man from Glasgow's Easter House safety fears over disgrace zebra crossing. An exclusive article written by Lauren Gilmore, Facebook community reporter. A fed-up pedestrian fears someone could be killed at a busy crossing unless council bosses act swiftly to upgrade the facilities. Peter Mcmillan, who lives in Easterhouse, claims that the lines on the zebra crossing at the beginning of Loch End Road have not been repainted for 4 years. The markings help Peter to cross the road safely as he's partially sighted and uses a long cane to help him get around. He fears a serious accident may happen at the junction as drivers are not able to see the lines marking it as a crossing. Peter said it's in a dreadful state. It's been like that for a good couple of years. It's never been touched. I live around the corner from it. A lot of the traffic treated as if it's a racing track. They don't stop because of the markings not being there. I'm partially sighted and a long cane user, and I've been told to always use traffic lights and crossings for my safety. I hope the council try to help the elderly, disabled and children, because this is not safe. I fear someone could be killed or have a serious accident. John White, a Conservative candidate at the upcoming local elections in the Glasgow North East ward, claims he's contacted the council on 2 occasions to have the issue rectified. He said, "I'm worried someone would maybe be killed or have a serious traffic accident. People deserve to be able to cross the road safely, and road markings play a huge part in that." Peter's story highlights just how important these markings are, but unfortunately we have a council administration which has its priorities all wrong. Restoring this zebra crossing for the safety of everyone and others like Peter is an absolute basic. I'll continue to work with Peter to ensure this zebra crossing is restored and safe to cross as soon as possible. A Glasgow City Council spokesperson said they were looking into the issue. An exclusive article written by Lauren Gilmore. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 14th of March. Talks to begin for charitable trust to take over Glasgow's Langside Hall. An article written by Drew Sandilands, local democracy reporter. Talks are set to begin on a lease which would see a charitable trust take over the running of the A-listed Langside Hall. The Langside Hall Trust, a registered charity, wants to run a commercially viable community hub, offering a theatre and performance space, as well as a venue for hire. Council officials have reported the hall is in need of a total renovation and that the trust would apply for funding for the refurbishment. Glasgow councillors are recommended to approve the start of negotiations between council staff and the trust when they meet on Thursday. The deal would be part of the People Make Glasgow Communities programme, a council scheme where community groups and third sector bodies can express an interest in local venues. Langside Hall was originally built in 1847 by the National Bank of Scotland and was moved brick by brick to its current location on Langside Avenue in 1903. Currently, Glasgow Life, which runs culture and leisure services for the council, has a 25-year lease for the building, which began in 2007. It was closed for maintenance in 2017, but had been available for hire before then, with rooms used for fairs, exhibitions, concerts, parties and weddings. The hall, however, remains closed and is in need of total renovation, a council report stated. Set up in 2013, the Langside Hall Trust, made up of more than 400 local people, has developed partnerships with Southside-based organisations such as Southside Fringe, Glad Cafe and South Glasgow Heritage and Environmental Trust. The council report added it has the support of local community council and area partnerships, several community groups and the Shawlands Business Improvement District manager. The Trust intends to operate and manage a commercially viable community space, supported by income-generating and commercial activities. It's understood the hall would have 3 streams of activity: a social programme with cultural and well-being activities, a venue for theatre and other performance events, and a traditional role as a space for hire by the community, including for weddings. The Langside Hall Trust intends to apply for funding to refurbish the hall from a number of sources, including the Lottery Heritage Fund, the UK and Scottish governments, and Glasgow City Council, the report added. Trust members have developed a business plan and a design for the hall's renovation, which the council believes is a comprehensive proposal for the use of a local heritage building that is currently not being utilised. A feasibility study was set up by the Trust in October 2020, with Glasgow-based Hoskin Architects appointed to lead a team of consultants, including culture and heritage-focused Jura consultants. Design options and a questionnaire were then shared with the public in February last year. Speaking at a council meeting in late 2020, Kevin Kane, chair of the trust, said, "It'll be a venue for theatre, for film, for dance and music. We're in a very fortunate position of having a very active local market that isn't well served for that." An article written by Drew Sandilands. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 14th of March. Thousands of NHS staff in Scotland off work for months with COVID. An exclusive article written by Caroline Wilson, senior reporter. Thousands of NHS staff in Scotland have been absent from work for 2 months or more due to COVID, figures show, as the government pledged to maintain a full pay arrangement. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, which employs 38,000 staff, said 1,106 of them had experienced one episode of sickness longer than 8 weeks over the course of the pandemic. In March 2020, the Scottish Government advised that employees forced to take time off due to COVID would be recorded under special leave and receive full pay. A government spokesman said it has no plans to change the current provision. Agency nurses are not covered by the arrangements. It comes amid warnings that waning immunity amongst older people may be contributing to a sharp rise in COVID hospital admissions. 1 in 18 people in private households in Scotland are estimated to have had the virus in the week to March the 5th, well, that's 299,900 people. NHS Lanarkshire said it was facing ongoing and significant staffing challenges due to COVID absences. At least 2,831 NHS staff have been off work for more than 2 months across Scotland, according to figures obtained by the Herald through Freedom of Information laws. NHS Grampian said 731 staff had been recorded as having a COVID-related absence lasting for more than 2 months, while the figure was 191 in NHS Lothian. NHS Fife would not disclose how many staff had been absent for longer than 2 months. The board said a total of 374 employees had been absent for COVID-19 related reasons. Lanarkshire said 32 staff were recorded as absent for 2 months or more as of the 31st of January, but did not provide a total figure. MPs have called on the UK government to recognise long COVID as an occupational disease, saying the move would help standardise support and care for those affected and improve data collection on the problem across the country. NHS staff in Scotland who are absent with other illnesses, including cancer, are entitled to between 1 month and a maximum of 6 months full pay. Dr Patricia Moultrie, Deputy Chair of the British Medical Association in Scotland, said COVID was a new virus with unknown side effects, and as such, long COVID was a special case. She added, "We'd expect GPs and practice staff to be covered similarly." A Unison spokesman said there was recognition that at some point the government would review the pay arrangements for COVID. He said, "Unison recognises that COVID was a unique, fast-moving and complex situation, and so we welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to generosity in the application of paid leave for staff who most probably caught COVID in the course of their work for the NHS. We recognise that as we've learned more about this virus, as it appears to have become less deadly and measures such as the vaccine programme have been rolled out, the government may now want to review the pay arrangements. We'd hope that in doing so they continue to acknowledge the hard work of staff and the fact that we still have a lot to learn about COVID and particularly how people recover from long COVID. In Ayrshire and Arran, 175 employees have had sustained periods of leave after becoming infected with the virus, with 155 staff affected in Tayside. NHS Dumfries and Galloway said 324 employees were off for 60 days or more up until the end of January. NHS Forth Valley recorded 85 staff as having been absent for 2 months or more, with 5 in NHS Highland, 18 in the Borders and 5 in the Western Isles. Shetland said no staff had been off work for more than 2 months with COVID. The Royal College of Nurses has expressed concern that many agency workers providing services to the NHS were only receiving statutory sick pay for COVID sickness. Colin Pullman, RCN Scotland's interim director, said, "We would like to see employment agencies ensuring that agency workers don't suffer any financial detriment if they're unable to work shifts because of COVID." There's also been concern that care workers were being forced to take holiday because employers were only offering statutory pay when ill with COVID or self-isolating. This contravenes government policy that they should be paid in full to limit infection spread. Analysis by the TUC found the UK has the least generous statutory sick pay in Europe, worth just £96.35 per week, and it's only available to employees earning £120 per week or more, meaning 2 million workers, mostly women, do not qualify. TUC General Secretary Francis O'Grady said, "COVID has shown us just how important sick pay is for individual workers, for vital services and for the whole economy." But there are still 2 million low-paid workers who are excluded from statutory sick pay, while those who qualify only get a pittance that's impossible to live on. The UK government must make sure every worker can get statutory sick pay, paid from the first day of the illness, and increase its value to at least as much as the real living wage. Rail Workers Union, the RMT, said members who required time off due to COVID were entitled to receive full pay for 6 months. An exclusive article written by Caroline Wilson.
Evening Times, March 14. Opinion. Jacqueline McLaren, councillor for the Canal Ward, on Glasgow's newest landmark. Last weekend, I was privileged to be among the first to visit the Stockbridge Junction, a new bridge connecting Ruckhill, Maryhill and Gilshochill. It truly was an honour to have the chance to see this amazing structure closely, and it won't be long before all our people can begin using this wonderful addition to our communities of North Glasgow. Part of the Stockbridge development has an additional project running alongside it. Local communities are being brought together by local artists to work together to create something extraordinary around this new Glasgow landmark. I visited 2 of the local artists involved in the project at their base in the Whisky Bond at Port Dundas, helping to make tiles which will be included in the new artwork designs. The tiles will be used either on the viewing platform itself or as part of other pieces of art surrounding the bridge. It was exciting to see the many tiles which have already been fired up and are ready and waiting for their owners to paint. I have never been involved in a public art project of this scale and struggle to remember anything similar in the north of the city in recent memory. Our local schools, nurseries, community groups, women's centres across Canal and Maryhill wards have come together to create something creative and permanent, something which involves the people of the very communities which will be served by this wonderful project. As I've written here several times before, the renewal of the canal and its impact on the health, well-being and general mood of the neighbourhoods which have grown up alongside it is one of Glasgow's great modern success stories. The bridge and the arts project are part of that. A significant part of this project will be the creation of a beather, a mythical creature from Scottish folklore. The beather is often described as either the largest and most deadly kind of serpent, or as a dragon minus the typical features such as wings or fiery breath. It dwells in mountainous caves and corries and carries a venomous sting. Is there a connection here with the north of the city? Did it live in the Campsies? It is this mysterious creature which will be adorned with the thousands of coloured tiles made by the communities across the north. It is interesting that most of the artwork around this new site will be covered in wonderful, colourful ceramic pottery. During the 19th century, Glasgow was a major centre for the production and export of ceramics. From the mid-18th century to the late 20th century, Scotland was involved in the making and export of pottery, spanning nearly 250 years of production, with a truly global reach. 4 of Glasgow's largest potteries, Bells, Port Dundas, Britannia and Caledonia were all situated along Glasgow's canal network, producing ceramics for national and international markets. Another pottery of international significance was situated in Postle Park. Established on Denmark Street in 1875, Postle or Saracen pottery has a complex and diverse history. Starting out making teapots, pitchers and plates, they exhibited at the Glasgow Exhibition of 1888. Under the brand name Nautilus, they made some of the finest porcelain ever produced in Britain, let alone Scotland. Tennant's Brewery took over the pottery in 1914 and began producing stoneware bottles for their export trade to Cuba. The pottery finally shut its doors in 1942, and it was demolished in the late 1980s. It's such a pity that Canal Ward has lost so much of its heritage over the decades, and nothing was put in place to protect these wonderful buildings. One of the artists on this project has very interesting plans to create a Scottish Pottery Museum beside the Forth and Clyde Canal. The creation of a Scottish Pottery Museum would be a first and create a space for local and international artists to thrive and to collaborate on future projects for exhibitions, creating as well a space for ceramic learning. Canal Ward will be going full circle now, with pottery and ceramics making a comeback in the north, back to its original home along the banks of the canal. This is a great community full of vibrancy, community spirit, history, and a real can-do attitude. I am so proud to represent it, says Jacqueline McLaren, councillor for the Canal Ward.
From the Glasgow Times of Tuesday, the 15th of March 2022, from the opinion section. Lockdown has sent me into goblin mode, by Katrina Stewart. For a brief spell around 2014, I tried in vain to reclaim the word slut. Not the perverted, twisted Americanization of the word, not the version used to penalise women for taking pleasure in their own bodies. There was a global movement trying to do that, the slut walks. No, the purest, original sense of the word, an untidy, slovenly woman. This is the word the columnist Catherine Whitehorn used in a seminal 1963 column to defend women who change their stockings in taxis or have cups in the study and boots in the kitchen. We women have simply never been able to claw back the word from those who wish to use it as a stick to beat us with, a label to ostracise us with. You can't really go about declaring yourself a slut without a lot of contextualising. But I have always been an untidy, slovenly woman. I was never a slovenly, untidy girl, but at some point all standards slipped and here I am, sitting in an anti-paradise, a domestic hell of my own creation. Dishes are not done, the laundry mounts up, I can't have visitors around because I'm too embarrassed to let them in. Even if I did let them in, there's nowhere to sit, as the chairs I find are useful receptacles for everything, from clothing to books to unpacked Christmas presents to the mail. Dishes in particular are a problem. The dishes give me an existential crisis. Unless I start using paper plates and disposable cutlery or give up food, this is it for the rest of my life, day in and day out, washing crockery. The dishes are a routine symbol of time's endless march, and I cannot bear it. That's just clarty. my friend Janet says, looking at the kitchen sink. I imagine there's truth to both our positions. In lockdown, the situation has worsened. Pre-pandemic, I would at least fret about the state of the place in case someone popped round. Yet we were then banned from having company, and all my guilty secrets became guaranteed to be kept between the four walls and me. Last Christmas, I was forced into a panic of tidying because I was having a new floors laid and the whole flat painted after living here for 10 years. So everything had to be packed up. Some 14 months later, and I still haven't unpacked. The boxes are now a permanent fixture in each room, and whatever might be in them, I now do without. I came home from cat-sitting over Christmas on January the 4th and never unpacked my suitcase. I sat it on my bed to try to force myself to deal with it, but instead spent months tucked up beside it, which hardly mattered, as I've largely become nocturnal during lockdown, staying up most of the night and napping on the sofa when needed. I was off on holiday last week to a cold climate similar to a Scottish winter, so just zipped the suitcase back up again and off I went. I've been feeling increasingly shamefaced about all this since socialising became an option again. What if, horror, someone pops round? They would have concerns, and rightly so. I gave my neighbour a lift on Saturday and he came in to wait while I put my coat on and organised my bag. It was only having a fresh pair of eyes in the place that made me appreciate what a chaotic vibe I'm giving out. Things have to change around here. Except this morning I read a piece in a respectable newspaper that gives my uncouth lifestyle habit a name: goblin mode. Attractive, I know. Apparently, during the initial phases of lockdown, people cleaved to cottagecore, making sourdough bread and learning to darn, sew and knit. They carried out home improvements and became the sort of citizens of whom Kirsty Allsop would be proud. Then the pivot. Some of us gave up. We started going to Zoom calls in our pyjamas and eating straight from the fridge with our hands. We didn't bother to dress to go outside, and we were blowed if we were doing online exercise classes. One person, quoted on their life in goblin mode, says they enjoy the mischief and feeling like they might jump on the back of a salamander and make trouble. I don't think I'd fit on the back of a salamander, given all this lockdown weight gain, but I do appreciate the notion of mischief. One slight problem with adopting goblin mode is that the rules fail me. Inherent to the phrase, says the writer, is the idea that it can be switched on and off. It's been enjoyable sliding into a sort of feral lifestyle where the rules of organisation and cleanliness don't apply. But I might be done now. Like blended working, a mix of human and goblin living seems ideal. If someone could source the off switch for me, I'd be very grateful. It's time for this goblin to emerge into the light. This article was by Katrina Stewart.
From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 15th of March 2022, from the news section. COVID Scotland. When is Nicola Sturgeon's update on restrictions and cases? By Emma Sabiak. Nicola Sturgeon will provide an update on coronavirus restrictions in Scotland after COVID-19 hospital occupancy soared to a 13-month high. Last month, the First Minister announced that the requirement to wear face coverings on public transport and in public places would be eased to guidance as of March the 21st. However, the change to restrictions was provisional on there being, quotes, no significant adverse developments in the course of the virus, close quotes. In the first week of March, an estimated 1 in every 18 Scots had COVID-19, according to data from the Office for National Statistics. Speaking to BBC's Good Morning Scotland on Monday, Scotland's Chief Medical Officer, Sir Gregor Smith, said that a cautious approach to lifting restrictions would be recommended to ministers. He added that there is some early evidence that the hospital admission rate is beginning to top out. When will Nicola Sturgeon's next COVID update take place, and what will she say? The First Minister will address MSPs in Holyrood at 2:20 p.m. on Tuesday, March the 15th. She previously announced Scotland's legal COVID restrictions could lift by March the 21st. This would mean an end to legal requirements to wear face coverings, as well as easing on the requirement for businesses to log customer details for track and trace purposes. With the UK government scaling back free testing from the 1st of April, Ms Sturgeon could also provide an update on the scheme in this update. The Scottish Tories urged the First Minister to stick to the original timescale despite the increasing case numbers. The First Minister must not use the rise in infection rates as an excuse to kick the can further down the road. The last remaining COVID restrictions must end as planned next Monday, said Dr Sandesh Gulayan, the party's health spokesman. Of course, we must all remain vigilant and use common sense, because COVID has not gone away, but the First Minister accepted last month that we will have to learn to live with it. Scottish Labour's deputy leader urged the Scottish Government to continue to support Test and Protect. The continuing progress towards some form of normality is to be welcomed after Scotland being under restrictions for so long, Ms Bailey added. But while this progress is welcome, it is clear that we are not out of the woods yet. How many people are testing positive for COVID-19 in Scotland? Since the announcement on provisional plans to ease restrictions on February the 22nd, daily case numbers have more than doubled from 6,427 to 13,220 on Friday. However, figures rose rapidly after official figures began including reinfections from 1st of March. In the same period, the number of people in hospital with the virus rose from 1,060 to 1,663 during the same period. On Monday, 1,805 people were in hospital with recently confirmed COVID-19. However, the latest cases were not released due to a technical issue with Public Health Scotland. Sir Gregor Smith said, "I think that a cautious approach at this point in time is probably the right approach, and we're already seeing the public adopting those additional protections," he said. How can I watch Nicola Sturgeon's COVID briefing? The COVID update will be streamed on the Scottish Government's social media channels. It can also be watched on their official TV website, and we'll bring you all the updates on our website. This article was by Emma Sabliak.
From the Glasgow Times of Tuesday, the 15th of March 2022, from the opinion section, Jacqueline McLaren, North Glasgow's newest landmark. Last weekend I was privileged to be amongst the first to visit the Stockingbridge Junction, a new bridge connecting Ruckhill, Maryhill and Gilslohill. It truly was an honour to have the chance to see this amazing structure closely. And it won't be long before all our people can begin using this wonderful addition to our communities of North Glasgow. Part of the Stockingbridge development has an additional project running alongside it. Local communities are being brought together by local artists to work together to create something extraordinary around this new Glasgow landmark. I visited two of the local artists involved in the project at their base in the Whisky Bond at Port Dundas, helping to make tiles which will be included in the new artwork designs. The tiles will be used either on the viewing platform itself or as part of other pieces of art surrounding the bridge. It was exciting to see the many tiles which have already been fired up and are ready and waiting for their owners to paint. I've never been involved in a public art project of this scale and struggle to remember anything similar in the north of the city in recent memory. Our local schools, nurseries, community groups, women's centres across Canal and Maryhill wards have come together to create something creative and permanent, something which involves the people of the very communities which will be served by this wonderful project. As I've written here several times before, the renewal of the canal and its impact on the health, well-being and general mood of the neighbourhoods which have grown up alongside it is one of Glasgow's great modern success stories. The bridge and the arts project are part of that. A significant part of this project will be the creation of a Bithyr, a mythical creature from Scottish folklore. The Bithyr is often described as either, quotes, the largest and most deadly kind of serpent, end of quotation, or as a dragon minus the typical features such as wings or fiery breath. It dwells in mountainous caves and corries and carries a venomous sting. Is there a connection here with the north of the city? Did it live in the Campsies? It's this mysterious creature which will be adorned with the thousands of coloured tiles made by the communities across the north. It's interesting that most of the artwork around this new site will be covered in wonderful, colourful ceramic pottery. During the 19th century, Glasgow was a major centre for the production and export of ceramics. From the mid-18th century to the late 20th century, Scotland was involved in the making and export of pottery, spanning nearly 250 years of production with a truly global reach. 4 of Glasgow's largest potteries, Bells, Port Dundas, Britannia and Caledonia, were all situated along Glasgow's canal network, producing ceramics for national and international markets. Another pottery of international significance was situated in Postle Park. Established on Denmark Street in 1875, Postle, or Saracen pottery, has a complex and diverse history. Starting out making teapots, pitchers and plates, they exhibited at the Glasgow Exhibition of 1888. Under the brand name Nautilus, they made some of the finest porcelain ever produced in Britain, let alone Scotland. Tennant's Brewery took over the pottery in 1914 and began producing stoneware bottles for their export trade to Cuba. The pottery finally shut its doors in 1942 and it was demolished in the late 1980s. It's such a pity that Canal Ward has lost so much of its heritage over the decades and nothing was put in place to protect these wonderful buildings. One of the artists on this project has very interesting plans to create a Scottish Pottery Museum beside the Forth and Clyde Canal. The creation of a Scottish Pottery Museum would be a first and create a space for local and international artists to thrive and to collaborate on future projects for exhibitions, creating as well a space for ceramic learning. Canal Ward will be going full circle now with pottery and ceramics making a comeback in the north, back to its original home along the banks of the canal. This is a great community, full of vibrancy, community spirit, history and a real can-do attitude. I'm so proud to represent it. If you want to know more about these wonderful plans, please contact Jacqueline, capital JACQUELINE Mclaren, all lowercase, MCLAREN, at glasgow.gov.uk. This article was by Jacqueline Mclaren, councillor for the Canal Ward.
From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 15th of March 2022, from the news section. The areas with highest and lowest COVID death rates in Glasgow since pandemic started, by Stuart Patterson. The most deprived areas in Glasgow have experienced more COVID deaths since the pandemic began than the least deprived areas. The Glasgow Times has analysed official statistics showing the COVID death rate is in the city and areas of multiple deprivation. Using the Scottish Parliament Information Centre, SPICE, data on deaths and deprivation statistics for almost 2 years, between March 2020 at the start of the pandemic and January the 31st this year, we found the stark divide between the most deprived and the least deprived areas. For the first time today, we reveal the local communities with the highest and lowest COVID death rates. Statistics for more than 100 areas across the city show that those with the highest COVID death rate are in the parts of the city which have more areas of multiple deprivation. While there are areas with high deprivation with lower death rates and areas with low deprivation and higher rates, the overall picture is the most deprived areas have suffered the most deaths. The 10 areas with the highest rates for deaths since the pandemic began in March are mostly in the north and east of the city, and the areas with the lowest are mainly in the west and south. The highest rate of COVID deaths in Glasgow between March 2020 and January the 31st of this year was in Drumchapel South, where the rate per 100,000 population was 962. There were 48 deaths in the area. Each area is split into smaller neighbourhoods or data zones. There are 3 data zones in Drumchapel South, and all are in the 20% most deprived areas in Scotland. In Ibrox East and Cessnock, there is a rate of 834 deaths per 100,000 population and 28 deaths. The area has 4 data zones, and 2 of them are in the 20% most deprived in the country. The third highest, Possil Park, had 762 deaths per 100,000 and 48 deaths. It is home to 7 data zones, and 5 are in the 20% most deprived in Scotland. There is a cluster in the east of the city with COVID deaths rates far higher than the Scottish average. Carntine, Central Easterhouse and Parkhead West are all in the lists of the 10 highest and among the most deprived in the country. Carntine has 3 out of 4 data zones in the 20% most deprived. Central Easterhouse has 5 out of 5 areas in the 20% most deprived, while Parkhead West and Barrowfield also has 100% of its 7 data zones in the 20% most deprived. Peter Kelly, Director of Poverty Alliance, said, "Inadequate levels of social security, insecure low-paid work and poor housing created conditions where people on the lowest incomes were more at risk from COVID." Health inequalities that existed before the pandemic were made worse, as these figures illustrate. It is vital that the lessons from the pandemic are learned and that we no longer tolerate levels of inequality that have put so many lives at risk. There is an urgent need to ensure work is secure and pays at least the real living wage, and that our social security system provides genuine and adequate support to all who need it. At the other end of the scale, those with the lowest rates are home to areas with fewer areas of deprivation. The lowest death rate is jointly held by Shawlands East and Finiston and Kelvinhoch, both with a rate of 28 per 100,000. Shawlands East, which had just 1 death recorded, has 0 of its 4 data zones in the 20% most deprived, while Finiston and Kelvinhoch, with 3 deaths, has just 1 of its 7 data zones, 14%, in the 20% most deprived. Anderston, where 2 of its 6 areas, 33%, are in the 20% most deprived, makes up the 3 lowest. Anderston recorded 2 deaths and a rate of 36 per 100,000 population. Other areas among the lowest COVID death rates in the city include North Kelvin with 48 per 100,000 and 2 deaths. It has 0 of its 5 data zones in the 20% most deprived. Kelvin Grove and University with 63 deaths per 100,000 and 0 out of its 7 data zones are in the 20% most deprived. The other areas making up the 10 lowest in the city are Glasgow City South, Glasgow Harbour / Partick East, Langside, Partick and Alexandra Parade. The 20 highest deaths. Drumchapel South, 24, 962 per 100,000. Ibrox East and Cessnock, 28, 834 per 100,000. Postle Park, 48, 762 per 100,000. Crookston South, 27, 744 per 100,000. Carntine, 26, 743 per 100,000. Yoker North, 21, 712 per 100,000. Milton East, 22, 691 per 100,000. Central Easterhouse, 15, 639 per 100,000. Parkhead West, 46, 615 by 100,000. Penny 32, 609 per 100,000. Greenfield, 29, 568 per 100,000. Springburn, 25, 560 per 100,000. Easterhouse East, 18, 548 per 100,000. Braidfold, 35, 524 per 100,000. Ibrox, 19, 523 per 100,000. Woodside, 18, 514 per 100,000. Cardonald South and East, 16, 499 per 100,000. Baillieston West, 17, 478 per 100,000. Kings Park, 21, 475 per 100,000. Shettleston South, 17, 445 per 100,000. The 20 lowest: Shawlands East, 1, 28 per 100,000. Finiston Kelvinhoch, 3, 28 per 100,000. Anderston, 2, 36 per 100,000. North Kelvin, 2, 48 per 100,000. City Centre South, 2, 50 per 100,000. Kelvin Grove and University, 4, 63 per 100,000. Glasgow Harbour, Partick South, 4, 75 per 100,000. Partick, 4, 100 per 100,000. Langside, 5, 109 per 100,000. Alexandra Parade, 3, 111 per 100,000. Scotstoun South and West, 4, 111 per 100,000. Denniston, 5, 113 per 100,000. Hillhead, 10, 113 per 100,000. Hillington, 4, 119 per 100,000. Shawlands West, 5, 126 per 100,000. Blairdardy West, 4, 134 per 100,000. Summerston Central and West, 6, 134 per 100,000. Strathbungo, 8, 138 per 100,000. Drumrye West, 5, 142 per 100,000. And Scotstoun North and East, 7, 152 per 100,000. This article was by Stuart Patterson.
From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 16th of March 2022, from the news section: Pervert ex-captain of the Waverley died from cancer months after he was jailed. By Connor Gordon. The pervert ex-captain of the Waverley died from cancer after being struck with the disease months after he was jailed. David Neal was locked up for 7 years in February 2020 for abusing 3 teenage boys aboard the famous paddle steamer. The 76-year-old, who committed the crimes between 1995 and 1997, was convicted after a trial at the High Court in Glasgow. Neal passed away on December the 7th, 2020, less than a year into his sentence. A fatal accident inquiry was then held due to the pensioner being a serving prisoner at the time. The probe at the Ayr Sheriff Court held Neil ended up in a hospice before he died. In May 2020, he had complained about passing blood. Neil, of Galston, Ayrshire, then went through a number of hospital tests. He continues to suffer from the same health concerns. In October of that year, Neil was found to be unwell in his cell at Glasgow's Barlinnie Jail and was eventually taken by ambulance to accident and emergency. His symptoms included pain in his stomach, and he had not eaten since the previous day. Medics concluded his condition was serious and that he was not a candidate for anti-cancer treatment. He was later transferred under guard to Ayrshire Hospice in Ayr for palliative care. On December the 7th, 2020, his condition deteriorated quickly and he died that night. It was found the sex offender had suffered liver cancer along with tumours on the lung. It emerged weeks prior to his death. A request had been made to have him freed from jail on compassionate grounds. Sheriff Siobhan Connolly today issued a written judgment following the inquiry. She said it had been agreed there were no precautions which could have been taken to avoid the death. The sheriff stated he had advanced cancer and was treated appropriately in prison, hospital and at the hospice. Neil had also previously been jailed in 1998 after being convicted of abusing 5 boys in his cabin. And that was an article by Connor Gordon. From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 16th of March 2022, from the news section, ScotRail nationalisation to cost taxpayers more than £4 million, by Martin Williams, senior news reporter. The nationalisation of ScotRail is set to cost the taxpayer over £4 million, it has emerged. Ministers have already spent £3.6 million in the transfer of operations from the Dutch state transport firm Abellio. It comes as Transport Scotland's Director of Rail, Bill Reeve, has admitted he is not confident over what the net cost of operating the new state-owned ScotRail will be as passenger numbers continue to slump against pre-pandemic levels as COVID restrictions ease. The Scottish Government announced last year that ScotRail will come under direct state control April the 1st this year. The Scottish Government will run ScotRail through an arm's-length company after it declared that the current system of franchising is no longer fit for purpose. Net Zero Energy and Transport Secretary Michael Matheson said the move will come through operator of last resort arrangements after he decided it was not the right time to seek a franchise procurement or competition to run Scotland's railways after Dutch state-owned railway company Abellio ends its control. Mr Reeves said that the final cost of the transfer of operation will be under £5 million, but said that the last franchising competition exercise with Abellio was more than double that. Having run the previous competition which cost us, I'm further shocked at the cost of such processes, but the last franchising cost was around £10 million from memory. Though I still remain struck at the scale of what's involved in a large, complex contractual set of transfers like this, the cost of nationalisation, is nonetheless substantially cheaper than that alternative option. But he said he was not confident of what the net cost of operating ScotRail would be, as he pointed out that weekday passenger numbers are at between 55% and 60% of pre-pandemic levels. Some £719.5 million has been allocated for the first year of the nationalised rail services, of which £312 million goes to the rail infrastructure owners Network Rail as a contribution to its costs. Mr Rees said, "What is not certain yet is what the revenue of ScotRail will be over this next year. We have learned in the last 2 years how demand has gone up and down at different stages. We were as low as under 10% of revenue at one point. At the minute we are on Saturdays up to pre-pandemic levels at the weekend, but we're bumping along the sort of 55% to 60% of revenue on a weekday at the minute. And I think we can look over the next year at a range of very plausible scenarios that would take us to very different passenger demand and therefore revenue figures. So could I look you in the eye and say I'm confident what the net cost of operating ScotRail over the next 12 months will be? No. Bluntly, that's not an issue of ownership, that's just an issue of the market conditions." When asked by Liam Kerr, the Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero, Energy and Transport, what is going to get better through nationalisation. Transport Minister Jenny Gilruth said, accountability to ministers. Mr Kerr told the Scottish Parliament Transport Committee, post-April the 1st, we have the same people, we have the same rolling stock, we have the same leasing arrangements in the short term, we have the same network at a cost of 3.6 million, with potentially fewer ticket offices, fewer services. So the question begs, is what can a nationalised rail company do that the previous operator couldn't? Ms Gilruth said, the franchise is now accountable directly to ministers, and ministers are accountable to the Parliament and are accountable to this committee. At the end of 2019, ministers announced that it stripped a bailout of the franchise 3 years early in the wake of continuing outcry over service failings and rising costs to the taxpayer. It came after a 2018 winter timetable with the introduction of high-speed trains and a new Class 385. Electric trains ushered in months of cancellations and disruptions to services, with much of it put down to staff shortages, partly due to training to deal with the new trains and timetable. ScotRail was forced to submit a plan by February 2019 to address failing performances which, if unsuccessful, could result in a breach of contract and lead to a bailout losing the franchise early. Ms Gilruth added, now I know, as a Fife MSP, of some of the challenges we are faced with by the bailout contract in the years leading up to where we are now. Some of the very real challenges have been about not having seats in trains, for example, trains being cancelled and delayed. I'm very alive to all of that. Do you think that's all that's going to go away under public ownership? I hope some of it will be released, but at least there will be accountability to Parliament, and at least there will be ministerial oversight on the process. And I think that's hugely important. And yes, some of the people will be the same, but these people are experts in their fields. We would want these people to be in charge of running ScotRail, for example. There is greater democracy, I think, in the way in which we hope to run Scotland's trains in the future, that we don't currently have under the franchising network system that we currently use under Abellio. A Transport Scotland spokesperson said, bringing ScotRail services under Scottish Government control on the 1st of April 2022 provides us with an opportunity to shape our vision for rail services going forward, services which are efficient, passenger focused and provide public value. The process has entailed more work than originally anticipated, but this has identified opportunities for material savings that are substantially larger than the mobilisation costs. £3.6 million remains significantly lower than the typical cost of £10 million or more required by public sector to run a franchise procurement competition, not to mention the bid costs that each bidder must incur. And that article was an exclusive by Martin Williams. From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 16th of March 2022, from the news section, secret Glasgow taxi driver, all in a night's work for our driver John, by our columnist the secret Glasgow taxi driver. We're all in dire need of as much good news as we can get right now, so it was magic to read a positive story about one of my fellow drivers from the weekend. His name is John Lundy, and he was out on duty on Saturday night, doing his bit to help get people home safely. We all know there's a real challenge with the amount of taxi drivers at peak times right now, not only in Glasgow by the way, but it's only right to champion the ones that are out there keeping the city ticking over. Anyway, John had a hire at the Doubletree in the city centre in the early hours, or, as many of us still like to call it, the Old Thistle. He picked up a group that had clearly had a ball in a big charity event in the hotel night, a St Patrick's Day fundraising do as it happens. Well, John was sitting there with his passengers ready to take them home when a poor wee soul wandered up to him all alone and asked, "Can you help me?" Without hesitation, and with the support of his passengers, John immediately sought to do just that. This person was not from Glasgow, was completely lost and had no money and had no battery on her phone, not a great place to be in the small hours. She had lost her pals who were staying at the Travelodge. The name of the hotel was all that our John needed to know. John, with the permission of his patient and understanding passengers, very quickly got the individual back to her pals, even charging her phone for her on the way. and that's the only thing he charged. It goes without saying, not a penny was asked for on this occasion. So the girl was safely returned to her pals and the original passengers were taken home, and then John got on with his next hire, working on until the streets were cleared. John Lundy, thank you for representing the city and the trade with such class. I know for a fact these things happen on most nights, you just don't always hear of them. And I only heard of this tale thanks to @Glasgow_taxis on Twitter. Go on, give them a follow. So, while you may curse at the shortage of drivers at peak times, let's be grateful for the ones we do have. Stay safe. And that was a piece by The Secret Taxi Driver. From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 16th of March 2022, from the news section, tragedy as Port Glasgow dad Paul Mcmillan passes away at 41, by reporter Lorraine Tinney. Tributes have poured in following the tragic sudden death of a popular Port Glasgow man at the age of just 41. Paul Mcmillan, a stalwart official with the Port Old Boys Union football team and the Boys Brigade, suffered a fatal cardiac arrest after choking on a piece of food while having dinner at home last Tuesday evening. Paul was a well-known and much-loved figure locally, and his loss has left loved ones and friends devastated, reports her sister titled The Greenock Telegraph. His wife Jennifer said she is still in shock over what had happened. Jennifer, 40, said, "It was so sudden that it doesn't seem real. I keep thinking Paul is at work and will come back. He was eating steak for dinner and he started to choke. I was battering his back. He dropped down to the floor and he couldn't breathe. He suffered a cardiac arrest. The paramedics arrived and they spent an hour and a half working on him, doing chest compressions. They told me that even if a doctor had been standing next to him, they could not have saved him. It was so far lodged in his throat and he couldn't breathe. He was taken to hospital, but it was too late by then." Paul, who worked for WebHelp UK, had moved to Falkirk to live with Jennifer and daughter Lucy, 10, and they had been left stunned by their sudden loss. She said, "Lucy is devastated. She couldn't have had a better dad. He took her on. He was ready-made for her from the first time they met. Now I have to be strong for her." Jennifer says she has taken comfort in the overwhelming tribute and messages of condolence she has received from the community. She said, "He touched so many people's lives. His philosophy was always, be kind. I know he was a good person without even speaking to him because of his smile in his eyes. He just radiated warmth. He had such a good way with people and helped so many folk with things, big and small." Paul, a former Port Glasgow High pupil and James Watt College student, was also the former manager at Esso in Port Glasgow and was well known in the town and the football scene. Jennifer said, "He used to tell me, I'm well known in the port, and I always knew he was well loved, but I didn't realise how well thought of. It has been mind-blowing. People he knew from years ago when he was working at McDonald's have been in touch. It's been unbelievable. When Paul made a friend, that was it for life." The couple met in 2016 through an online dating site and were soon smitten. Jennifer said, "I knew he was the right man for me. I'd never felt that way about anyone before." They married at Gretna Green 2 years after getting together and soon happily settled down to family life. Jennifer said, "I was attracted by Paul's honesty. He had a lot of integrity and he was just such a good guy. He was very straight to the point but kind with it." The couple were dealt a blow when Jennifer was diagnosed with breast cancer last July. She underwent rounds of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, catching COVID in between, with Paul her rock to help her battle the disease. Jennifer said, "It was really difficult, but I received a lot of support from friends and family, and Paul. He was a tower of strength. He took on all the cooking and looking after Lucy, and all the ferrying her about the things she does." The couple were looking forward to a new year and starting to make plans for the future, thinking that the worst was behind them. Jennifer said, "We were out on Saturday for my birthday, and he said I was his soulmate. No one had ever said that to me before. We were starting to make plans and joked about growing old together. Paul also leaves his mum Linda Mackenzie and stepdad Gordon Mackenzie, and a stepbrother and stepsister. Jennifer is planning on a service in Falkirk and Greenock Crematorium, so his many friends in Inverclyde can pay their respects. A Just Giving page has been set up online by Paul's friend Scots Jack to support his family following the tragedy. Pledges can be made at www.justgiving.com/crowdfunding/Paul-Mcmillan. And that report was by Lorraine Tinney.
And that was this week's Glasgow Times News podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.